Hello and welcome back to MedTalk. Today we're going to be looking at three-person babies, which is something that was very recently in the news. There was a baby born from three people's DNA in the UK recently. The full story is that it's been, most of their DNA comes from two parents, but around 0.1 from a third donor, a woman. And this technique was to prevent children from being born with devastating mitochondrial diseases. And fewer than 5 such babies have been born in the world. A few have been born in America and in Brazil. I think this is the first UK case though. This is because the baby is genetically 100% related to its parents. It's only that 0.1% which comes from the donor woman, which is not in its nuclear DNA, it's its mitochondrial DNA, which doesn't affect the genome or the phenotype of the baby at all. So what even is mitochondrial DNA? It's circular DNA, which is in the mitochondria, and it only codes for a couple 100,000 base pairs out of the 3 billion total base pairs in the human genome. And it encodes proteins related to respiration, but it doesn't really affect anything to do with gene expression. And the endosymbiosis theory proposes that mitochondria, chloroplasts, and possibly other organelles are descended from formerly free-living prokaryotes, so bacteria. And the evidence for this is that mitochondrial DNA is circular and prokaryote DNA is also circular. And there are some enzymes that have been found in mitochondrial and chloroplast linings that are also in bacteria. And as well as mitochondria and chloroplasts can only split by binary fission, which is the way bacteria split and not by mitosis. So the idea is that a bacteria entered an ancestral prokaryote millions of years ago, either as a predator or as a food source, and for some reason it wasn't destroyed in the mitochondria in the cytoplasm, so it just lived there as a symbiote, I believe, and that's how these organelles came into place. So mitochondrial DNA is its ancestral form is the plasmid DNA of bacterial cells. So we only inherit mitochondria from our mother, mitochondrial DNA from our mothers. So our nuclear DNA, our genome, is 50-50 from both of our parents, right? But mitochondrial DNA is only inherited maternally. You cannot pass it down paternally. There are some we don't really know why this is. Some studies with roundworms show that there's a self-destruct mechanism in paternal mitochondria after fertilization, and some say that there are these organelles called autophagosomes which kill the mitochondria in sperm cells. And the reason people think it could be is because the mitochondria of the sperm have been overworked by swimming to the egg, so they have so it's more susceptible to DNA damage and mutations. So it's safer to use the mother's mitochondrial DNA. There's also a male equivalent. Basically, there's mitochondrial Eve, which is the most recent common ancestor, who is a woman, of all humans on Earth, and who passed down her mitochondrial DNA. So we can trace back mitochondrial lineage, which is helpful when looking at mitochondrial diseases. There's a male equivalent for that, Y chromosomal Adam, but Adam and Eve did not live at the same time. Eve was probably much earlier than Adam evolutionarily. Y chromosomal Adam was the most recent common ancestor for all men on Earth currently, because Y chromosomes are only inherited by the paternal line, and that is the most recent common ancestor for men, which can link to sex-linked disorders with the Y chromosome. So examples of mitochondrial diseases are Leigh syndrome, which is the progressive loss of mental and movement abilities, and typically results in death within 2 to 3 years, usually due to respiratory failure, and MERF, myoclonic epilepsy with ragged red fibers, which can cause seizures, poor muscle control, muscle weakness, cardiac arrhythmia, so irregular heartbeat, hearing loss, optic atrophy, so losing eyesight, and dementia. And this was a woman who was recently in the news, Sharon Bernardi, and her son Edward, who died at age 21. I think she lost 7 or 8 children to mitochondrial disease. Most of them died stillborn or miscarriage. And Edward was the only, I think, surviving son, and he was only predicted to live for 2 years, but he lived till 21. And no matter what she does, like, mitochondria is always inherited by the mother, right? So any child she has will always have the mitochondrial disease. So this treatment is pioneering for women like her. So how does this work? So firstly, the parent, it can be done by 2 ways. Either you remove the unhealthy mitochondria of the egg itself before fertilization, or you remove the mitochondrial DNA from the fertilized egg cell. Both ways are basically the same. You remove the parent's nuclear material or the mother's nuclear material, and you insert it into the donor egg cell. So your genetics are all the same. It's just that your organelles from the mitochondria are healthy rather than inheriting your mother's faulty mitochondria. This can lead to risks. So risks can include reversion. So like if they missed any any defective mitochondria, it can multiply in number and cause the disease anyway. And sometimes and there is concern that disrupting gametes by inserting and removing genetic material can cause mutations and DNA damage. And there's concern that eggs might not develop properly, or the fetus might not develop properly. So in the UK, there is strict monitoring of lab conditions and of the progress of pregnancy once fertilization occurs. So this is part of research called germline gene therapy, which is DNA that's inserted to reproductive cells and will correct the genetic variants of the reproductive cells of the individual and can be passed to future generations. So if that child ends up being a girl and has children, the donor mitochondria will be inherited by her children. So in 2015, doctors started pioneering for laws to pass in Parliament for this. The UK is the only country where this is legal, by the way. And Parliament did pass it after like a short debate. And the church was quite against it, Anglican Church and the Catholic Church, and they were saying that and some pro-choice groups, they were saying that it's unethical, and it's the first step to genetically modifying humans and like just having designer babies where parents can choose what characteristics they have for their children, and religiously that poses a bunch of ethical questions. And so what are your thoughts? Like, do you agree with this sort of therapy, or do you think it's like unnatural?
Personally, it's a bit 50-50. Like, if you're doing it for like, because this is back in the news as well, like in China you could like basically program your baby, so you could like change some of the genes so they have green eyes, they can have blue eyes. Yeah. That's just on their personal desire of the parent. That I don't agree with, but if it's something to like save a child, then yeah, go ahead with it. But then again, like religiously, on a religious standpoint, I wouldn't do it, because like, but then again, like in religion, IVF and all that's allowed, like you can have that. This, because it's a third party, it's not going to be allowed, obviously, religiously. But I would say, yeah, if I had the choice to, like, if I had the chance and I knew I had this mitochondrial sort of disease and defense, then it would be better if I had the chance to be able to have a child that doesn't have it and doesn't pass it on. It's better to like stop it when you can rather than allow it to continue to happen.
Yeah, I agree.
I would say if there's risk of death, then go ahead with it, but then there's like a really fine line between it, because if it's to like, fix like some like diseases and stuff, then when you talk about like Down syndrome and stuff as well, if you were to like say like fix Down syndrome by like things like aborting children because they might have Down syndrome when they're born, that's also kind of like edging into designer babies, because they will still live, but you're supposed to be curing the disease, but then
is the disease even a bad thing that happens?
Yeah.
And also it goes back to the idea that the child is yours, but you don't have the right to sort of modify it, because like that child has it's his own life, like it's another life being. You as a parent shouldn't be sort of making a decision that, oh yeah, this child might have Down syndrome and I don't want to look after a child that has Down syndrome.
But this child, like if you have a mitochondria, you're guaranteed to die. Like
Yeah, but
within
that
a few
child
years. So
lived
they
up
won't,
to
might not be a
21.
child in the first place.
But then again, like there are cases where it doesn't really happen. Like science can
Yeah.
always be wrong. Like
yeah,
there's
yeah,
never.
like Edward's, like,
Yeah, Edward, like it was an anomaly, but it's still possible. There is a chance that they would survive. But as I would say, like as mentioned, Down syndrome or other diseases, we have to take that into consideration because, like, especially with the pro-choice movement, it's very much like stick to like one perspective. Like, oh, if it's a young child or it's a young mother, oh, you need to have your career, abort the baby. When in reality, that baby could have had a better career than the mother could have had, for example. Like that, the child in itself should be able to have the right to live, even if it's not for as long as you would hope for.
suppose, yeah, that goes into like abortion ethics, which we might cover some other time. Yeah, that's it. That's really it. Thank you.